evening and welcome to February's edition of The Edge. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is TREVOR, LEWINGTON. I'll be your host this evening. On the third Thursday of every month, we're talking to community and business leaders who are making a real difference in Southern Alberta, and tonight is no exception. I'm super excited to have Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities. He's also the Vice Chair of Treasury Board, and perhaps more important for us, the member of the Legislative Assembly for Lethbridge East. Welcome, Mr. Nathan Neudorf.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Trevor. This is really exciting for me.
I know the day started in Edmonton, so this is a long one. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, no, it's important. There's no votes for me in Edmonton. They're all right here in Lethbridge, and I try to get back whenever I can.
No, we appreciate it. So your government has been focused on trades, the importance of trades, how trades are perhaps, historically have not been seen in a positive light compared to university degrees, but that's actually your background. It was, I think sort of your pathway from carpentry, if I remember right, through to project management to business ownership. I'm wondering if you can talk about that journey and perhaps inspire some of our trades folks that, there's multiple paths to follow. Could you talk a little bit about your background?
For sure. Yeah, I remember way back in grade 12. So this is where my political story starts too. I took an economics class in grade 12 and absolutely loved it. Really liked my teacher. And I still remember him. I chat with him whenever I can catch up with him again. And exposed me to the bigger world of economics and political science and all of that. So I remember going home talking to my parents saying, listen, I know what I want to do. I want to go take economics and political science. And my parents said, absolutely never going to happen. Go get a real job.
They're like, thanks for trying.
Yeah,
not an option.
Not an option.
Okay.
So then I sort of really, I was so set on that. I didn't really know where to land. So then mathematics, science, engineering, very much also strengths and interests of mine. So I got into BCIT,
okay,
and I ended up taking civil and structural engineering to utilize that skill set. And then, odd twist of fate, I ended up getting a job here in Lethbridge. A whole lot of other story that we don't need to get into, but I ended up getting a job in Lethbridge, serving at the end of a survey rod. And that's right when Ralph Klein privatized that whole transportation sector that was previously in the government of Alberta. But all those government transportation officers and that whole department was privatized. And so then I was looking at a minimum wage job for a long time because all those guys had more experience and they flooded the system.
You were bottom of the totem pole.
I was bottom of the totem
not
pole.
An option.
Well, nowhere to go. So then I'm like, now what do I do? And that's when my father-in-law is a carpenter. My wife had to go back to BCIT to get a little bit of upgrading her emergency specialty as a nurse.
Right. And
I went back and I worked for him as a carpenter, started my journey there. We came back here and I spent 25 years in construction, working my way through the trades, project management, as you said, having my own businesses, starting a couple, and then ended up working for a terrific local company, Ward Brothers, and as a project manager. That really exposed me to a huge cross-section of businesses and community leaders at the university, college, city, all of those kind of things. And that's sort of where a lot of the groundwork was laid for me to know people and know the issues and know the types of people that cared about those particular issues.
Okay.
And and that's sort of how that all sort of worked together.
I would imagine that gave you sort of a bird's eye view when you were later Minister of Infrastructure. You not only did you work on road crews, but you'd seen projects as a tradesperson, as a business owner, and sort of the full spectrum of what's required in a bid and in a project and to successfully manage construction.
Yeah, all of that. I can tell you there's very few carpenters in the legislature. That's not a very common trade route.
A lot of lawyers.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers, a lot of community and social workers and that kind of thing, and some from medical fields, and a lot of political staffers actually are there, and I think that's a concern broader across North America and maybe even around the world. But having that perspective, having worked in construction, been part of the Lethbridge Construction Association and the Alberta Construction Association, to end up being their minister, there was a pretty big sense of pride in that community.
I'm sure
one of theirs made it.
Right.
It was short-lived. I was only there for 7 months, but it was pretty fantastic at the time. And I think we actually laid the groundwork for a lot of relationship building between the industry. There was a significant amount of frustration between the government and its actions to protect the taxpayer, a lot of hoops to jump through, and then industry is labeled as sort of a bit of mistrusted kind of.
Right.
All these homes on homes, and those kind of things where they're trying to fill a niche and show what can go wrong, but what happens is the suspicion of the construction industry, because they're the guys trying to get your money or make like that's not a true representation of what.
That's an exception rather than the rule.
I would think so, or it speaks to the fact that things cost money. Things cost a lot of money if you want to do it well, and if you try to reduce the cost too much, you end up in trouble. So that's the tension that was there, and I was able to spend a lot of time because I knew both sides, to get them in rooms and get them talking again and saying, do you know why the lawyer on the behalf of the government of Alberta is so stuck on these contracts? Is because if it doesn't work, the taxpayer pays for that.
Now this is public money that we're responsible for.
And it's public money, and who do you think they scrutinize? Well, the elected officials, and
right.
Like I'm the one who doesn't get elected. So when we were able to talk through that, we were able to take some big steps toward, okay, risk allocation. Some of it, a lot of it's going to rest with the government anyways, because that's where it does. But how do we partner with industry instead of blame industry or treat them as the enemy?
Right.
And that was, I think, really laid some groundwork. Now Minister Pete Guthrie, is the Minister of Infrastructure. He's doing a lot of really great work, and I want to take a little bit of credit that I set him up.
You just set him up for success. Fair enough. So it must be, again, coming again back to sort of this hands-on creation, being with these companies, having literally building Southern Alberta. As you drive around, are you ever tapping your wife on the shoulder, like, "Hey, I built that," or "I was involved"? Is there anything that stands out to you, like in that sort of portfolio of all of the things you've done? Are there a couple of sort of pride projects where you go, yeah, that was mine?
There's a few, and my kids hate it when I do that because I do it everywhere. So probably the most iconic is the water tower. So the very first time that was constructed, all the milk in there, myself and my team put in. So while we could haul the materials up with a crane, all of our tools and ourselves had to go up the stairs every day. And I think the worst day I had was up and down the stairs 7 times. So that's a long way up.
It's a big tower.
It's a long way up. But very iconic for Lethbridge. So very proud to have worked on that one. Lots of projects at the university, like the digital audio lab at the University of Lethbridge. It is a room not much bigger than this one.
Right. That
at the time was the most expensive room in Lethbridge. It was $750,000 for a soundproof room.
For a room.
For a room.
Okay.
To do digital sound recording, and the walls were multiple feet thick and different angles. Another very, very iconic high-end room that's still in use today. Very proud that one was my construction company did that, and there's lots of other ones. Almost every school, a lot of work at the college, and city buildings, parks. A lot of the public art in the city of Lethbridge were my projects. The big granite stone at Henderson Lake with the geese pulling the rock?
Yeah.
That was my project. So I'm really proud that I was able to add some of those touches too. It's not just buildings, but public art and some of that stuff.
And we sometimes forget that construction is art. It is a studio where creative industries can flourish. It's not just a school or a church or a road, right?
Exactly. And the trades, we've got some fantastic architects, and the engineering too. Like the things behind the walls, above the ceilings, the wires and the pipes, and people thought about it significantly to make that happen. And I'm really proud of those projects. I'm really proud of the trades that we have here in Lethbridge. Too often there's sometimes a general thought that can Lethbridge Lethbridge have the trades to do this? The answer is emphatically yes, we can.
We have that talent locally.
We have a lot of that talent locally.
Right. Now, I mean, obviously running your own business, working for a larger corporation, there must have been some early leadership lessons that sort of came out of sometimes the mistakes. Not that those ever happen, but where are these sort of key lessons that sort of still today you hold with you as a result of some of that work experience?
Yeah, I think as I was pondering that earlier, because thanks for the heads up on a couple of these questions, a lot of it is actually, you don't always get to pick who you work with. And you might not understand them. You might not even like them. at times, to be perfectly honest, and that's a little blunt. I know most people will be shocked at, even at the thought that someone might not like them. Being a politician, I can tell you there's a lot of people.
You're used to it, yeah.
Yeah, people don't like me. But, so you have a decision, like, do you want to do a job and make money and pay your trades and pay your employees? That's kind of the whole point. And to do that, you have to satisfy the needs and wants of your client. And so liking them isn't the question. Is how do I understand them? How do I talk to them? How do I listen to them? And how do I treat them with respect, that we can go through this in a mutually beneficial way where they get what they like and I get what I need, which is the funding. And that lesson's really taught me a lot. In politics, same thing, whether it's staff or departments or your stakeholders or your portfolio or just members of the community that you got to deal with.
That aren't going to agree with you or even like you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the lesson is they're a human. They are a constituent or a resident of Alberta. They have a genuine, legitimate need, and it is literally my job to help or try to help to serve that need. Now, sometimes you can't for one reason or another. There's just you're not autonomous within this role. You don't have power to flick a switch and make everything right.
There's laws and policies and strategies and other things that you're part of.
And there's someone asking for my help advocating for them. And I'm like, listen, I'm neither a lawyer nor a doctor, and those realms I can't touch. Like, the legal process is distinct. It's part of our governance structure in Canada, and we're very fortunate to have a justice system that broadly is just.
It's independent. It's free from influence.
It's free from influence. You're not bribing judges. Like, we might like to think that, but I don't think that's really there. I think there's a lot of really good people doing their best, and we make mistakes, and some things should be considered differently, possibly, or might have a difference of opinion. But I can't influence that. Right? People say, just go make this happen.
Doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way.
And that's a good thing.
And that's a really good thing, right? Like, you don't want politicians who can tap somebody on the shoulder and subvert the course of justice. Like that, you don't want that. And nor do you want that medically or any other realm. That's not my job. So that's partly why you can't always get there, but at least you can raise awareness and talk about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, you talked about the lesson of this communicating, working with people that you don't always agree with, satisfying your clients. So it's a great sort of prep work for politics and the job you have today. But what made you actually run? I mean, at what point did you go, ooh, I'd love more scrutiny of my personal life. I'd love to take abuse on social media. Yeah. This feels like a good idea.
Some of that stuff gets minimized in your head. Okay. But like, that's not going to happen to me because people like me, right? You win the majority, people are going to love you. No one ever told me about Lethbridge East, and 51% is actually a really good number. But that means 49% didn't.
Maybe we're not as enthusiastic, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, it is. You have to learn. That's where, for me, it goes down to a basis of respect. If you come to my office, I don't try to care who you voted for or what you look like or what color your skin is. Like, those are really, really important things right now in our culture. We have a very diversified culture, and number one, treat you with respect. I may not like you, I may not agree with you, vice versa, but I can listen and treat you with respect. So that's really important. And that training, again, what made me want to get into politics, ironically, is the unthinkable happened in Alberta, and we voted an NDP government. So, not to be partisan, but I talked a little bit about the high school, this kind of a dream of mine since then. And fast forward about 22 years, I was thinking about it. My kids were getting a little older. I had 25 years in construction and starting to think about what's next. Maybe I could give it a shot. And it wasn't quite the time or place. I still had 4 of our kids in middle school or high school. But then the NDP did win, which I think shocked a lot of people. And to be perfectly fair, I think it shocked the NDP. And not that... Anyways, we don't have to get the partisan side of it, but I went, you know what? The next 4 years in construction, where there's a lot of blue collars, not orange collars, and just calling it like I see it, I kind of got tired. I'm sure you got tired of people complaining about it. So was I going to continue to complain, or was I going to get off my butt and do something?
Okay.
And 4 years later, again, all but two of my kids had graduated high school, and those two were driving and fairly independent. And my wife and I talked about it, and we said, we've always wanted to. I've always wanted to. So let's give it a shot.
Okay.
And we tried, and we had quite a unique journey. We started in Lethbridge. For one reason or another, we ended up in Livingston-McLeod.
I remember that, yeah.
Came back to Lethbridge, and then won in February, and the writ dropped in March. So I had 1 month, so we didn't have a team, we didn't have any money. Myself and Minister Mohammed Yassin were the last two nominations that ended up winning that election.
Wow.
Anyone nominated after us in 2019 didn't win.
There just simply wasn't enough time for them
Not
to
enough time to
get on the ground and
learn the stuff, get on the ground, get money, build a team. They just didn't have enough time, so they lost.
Right.
So we've come a long way.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned wife, kids. I can only imagine. I think your day started at 5 a.m. this morning in Edmonton, as an example. You probably haven't seen your lovely wife for a number of days.
That's right.
I would imagine the burden is pretty significant, and although your kids are older, how do you manage the demands of public life and multiple roles within cabinet and executive council with still having a life and like interacting with the person you decided to spend your life with? How does that work?
Sometimes it doesn't.
Fair.
And I was going to joke that my wife loves it when she sees me, which is rarely. So, but it is challenging, and she still works as a nurse as well.
Okay.
And as you know, we need nurses 24/7. So even when I'm home, sometimes she's not necessarily there.
Of course, that shift rotation and shift work.
Exactly. So she's working as well. So it takes a lot of intentionality to make sure that work and politics doesn't take over my life, because it's easy to do. There is literally always something to do, someone to talk to, or another meeting, and turning the phone off, saying no, and making time is really, really important. And an added complication is that I'm really, really far away from the capital in Edmonton and the secondary location in Calgary.
Yeah, everything requires some sort of travel, which I guess urban ridings in Edmonton and Calgary, our MLAs sometimes forget the convenience of that.
Exactly, and this will be my only political pitch, I hope, is that if you ever hear about a government wanting to buy planes, there's actually some good thinking about it. One is safety. If you go back just the last few years, how many MLAs of every party have been in significant vehicle accidents?
I remember a fatality, Mandy Muller,
passed away, and I was on a Team Lethbridge trip actually when we were in the legislature. The most kind legislator question period we've ever seen was because that was when they were remembering Mandy Muller and that tragedy. And to be perfectly honest, there's a lot of communities, and they don't even have to be that remote. Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Lloydminster, certainly Grand Prairie and Fort McMurray and Peace River, where they don't actually get the representation that they truly deserve because it's so hard to get there. Particularly for the winter months, like it's really hard to get there,
right? And
dangerous. So, I mean, your viewership is quite large, from what I hear. It's something to think about, that it's not just a luxury item for a politician. It's a safety consideration, somewhat a cost consideration, and a representation. It is very good for particularly the Premier and ministers to go see some of these remote and smaller communities that they just don't get to, because the big cities have a lot of people, a lot of traffic. That's where you go. It's easier to get there, and that's hard.
Well, I think I've harassed you many times about your job is actually to remind them there's stuff south of Calgary, and
exactly.
And that's in jest, but it's challenging sometimes for folks that have full calendars and other ministers to actually make a circuit of the province.
Yeah, I remember the first year, 2019, the first summer, I was boasting about getting 23 ministers to Lethbridge because I thought that was pretty good, because we hadn't seen that number for a long, long time. And in every community, particularly centralized communities like Lethbridge, where we provide the children's services, we provide the justice services, we provide the health services, we provide the educational and advanced education and supportive education, the English second language for those first-time Canadians and their families, and that's mostly housed in Lethbridge.
This is the hub for the whole region.
For the whole region,
Yeah.
so it's important to get them down here, yeah, and to be down here, and that's where, yeah, sometimes we forget how big our country is and how awesome our province is. It's beautiful. 2020, I got to be chair of the Student Transportation Task Force.
Right.
And because of COVID, transportation was a little more difficult. But I drove myself to some amazing communities, and because it's schools, they almost all had gymnasiums. So we're sitting in desks 2 or 3 meters apart,
Yeah.
talking to people halfway across the gym because don't cross the center line.
Of course. Yeah.
Taking those precautions, but I can tell you, people are proud of their communities, and we have some absolutely amazing communities and people in Alberta. Wherever they live, that's a commonality. Where you live and put down roots, you're proud of it.
It's home. Like
it's home.
Yeah.
And you know the warts and freckles and flaws.
Sure.
But you want to be proud of it, and you want to make it better. And I will give kudos to Shannon Phillips that we have lots of things that we don't agree on, but I will give her this. She wants to make Lethbridge and Alberta better. We picked different pathways to do that, but I wish there was a little bit more consideration for politicians in general. Till now, let's get so polarized. You think this, I think that, I hate you. Okay, well.
Yeah, we can't possibly talk because you're from a different party.
Exactly. Let's sort of tone that down a bit and realize that there's lots of shades of gray in life, and we want the same thing. We're going to pick different avenues. What's the best of the avenues you bring forward, and what are the best of the avenues I'm bringing forward? What are some of the limitations that we've got, because we don't have unending finances. We all face a limitation to that. And how do we talk that through better? And that, I think that's one of my personal frustrations with democracy at large, is that we end up in these polarized camps and we don't actually have the quote-unquote ability to talk things through that I think would serve people better.
Do you think it's, is it social media? Is it just modern politics? Like, what do you think drives that from an Alberta perspective? I'm curious.
Yeah, social media certainly is a factor in consideration, and the algorithms, how they develop that, right?
Right.
Like you read that story, then you're going to get 10 more stories
just like that. Yeah.
And you're going to become very, very trapped in your thinking, whether it's left or right. So it certainly doesn't help, although it is a lot of information at your fingertips. I think it also isolates people.
Okay.
And COVID also exacerbated that, where now really, like, we can't talk to each other, right? Because we're working from home, or I don't see anybody with a mask on, and I don't know if you're sick because I can't tell.
Yeah, we would never have been this close, that's for sure.
Right,
The whole time.
that's not 2 meters, there's
Right.
no hockey stick. Yeah. So we got into these patterns where how many more meetings do we do by Zoom now, or Teams, or
For
whatever?
sure.
Which is great, helpful, helps overcome those distances that I was complaining about earlier. But at the end of the day, we're still humans. And I do know with some interest, I follow demographics and trends. People under 30, significantly fewer are getting married, significantly fewer are getting into relationships. And I have kids of that age group, and I see particularly the younger ones going, we don't really know how to do that, right? Because we only hang out with people like us.
Right.
Well, then how do you talk to a girl if you're my son, or a boy if you're my daughter? Like, they're different just by biology. So how do you break that down if you've never had to, where we've isolated ourselves in these little clumps and groups?
And we've created these barriers that are even harder to overcome now.
Exactly.
I guess,
So I see that, and I'm going, that's probably why on social media there's all these dating apps and different things to
Right.
try to help you, because we don't know how to do it on our own
Right.
before, right? Like, I don't know how you met my wife. I met my wife through school and church and youth group and different things like that. I wouldn't have met her otherwise. But every Sunday we went to church, and every Friday night we went to youth group or whatever. Right?
Yeah, so you were in those places at that time. And
Yeah, and you get to see a lot of people. Right now it's school, and
Right.
it's harder, right? Because sports teams are typically girls teams, boys teams, all that kind of stuff. It's not the same. Not the same society it was when we grew up.
Okay.
I don't know how we got here.
No, that's perfect. Anyway, it's interesting. So again, you chose to enter politics to make a difference and bring your skill set. You know, you chaired this task force. I know you were a representative of the Council of State Governors. You end up with a portfolio of, you know, infrastructure when your first portfolio in government. And so at some point you're like, in this polarized world, you're you know, dealing with social media, you're dealing with this, and somehow in the midst of a global affordability crisis, sticking your hand up to be the affordability and utilities minister seems like a good plan. So, you know, talk to me a little bit about sort of that transition from infrastructure to affordability and the scope of that.
Well, it wasn't quite I put my hand up. It's kind of that when your boss is the premier and she asks if you want to do something, you don't really want to say no.
Yeah. Are you sure? Are you interested in this?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, of course.
Yes. So there was a little bit of that, and there's also a little bit of this is pretty vital. And the premier was actually very gracious to share some of her thinking on that, saying there's stuff that needs to move here. And there's different types of people in leadership. There's different types of people everywhere. There's people that move big things, people that move smaller things, and people that can manage things. And she said, you're that first type. You can move some big things. There's some things that need to move here. And
we have to do this different.
We have to do this differently, and it's pretty critical. Would you be willing to undertake that task? And I somewhat hesitantly at first said yes, but I did say yes. And as I got into it, I have started to love it. It's complex, but again, some just amazing people across the province that are in this sector because they're highly intelligent, highly motivated, highly technical. Again, ties in with my background. Like I get it. I get how that stuff works. They are businesses. It's a free market thing. It's
right.
And talking to them, saying, what are the barriers? Talking to municipalities, saying municipalities don't necessarily hate renewables or whatever, but they're like, we're trying to do this and this, and it's not quite working. And there's no rules, and nobody's listening to us. We can solve that. We can solve that. So that's where listening and it's so much more fun to get a portfolio where the things that you do can actually help. Because there are some portfolios that are much more difficult. I will point out children's services that is a very, very critical, very challenging. You can make meaningful change, obviously, but
there are no easy answers.
There's no easy answers, right? Like I wish that we would never have to have a sexual assault center, but we do. We've got a new one in Lethbridge. The people there are amazing and wonderful, and it's just traumatic that they have to help these small people with these horrible things.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It's probably not going to go away in our lifetime. Like that's part of the dark side of humanity. Is there's some of these things that have been around a long time, and
so to be the minister tasked with fixing that is
you can't fix it. All
right.
you can do is manage it, right?
Right.
So I think it's a lot more exciting and hopeful in something like utilities, electricity, that I think we actually can fix it, or at least make it a lot better.
Right.
Right. And that's what I love about it.
So could you talk to us then about some of your priorities in the portfolio? What are some of the big rocks that have to move?
Sure. So, well, there's a couple things. One, affordability, top issue. I think we talked about that. Sometimes it's hard to define what affordability is, especially in an age of inflation like we've had.
Right.
But that's, I think we can actually address that. And why I say that is because electricity is a primary input cost. Here, how many lights do we have on in here?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Microphones and computers, all, like, you cannot do this without electricity.
Right.
And whatever costs to run this, that's a big part of it. So if we can lower that cost,
okay,
that's going to lower the cost of doing this. If you think about groceries and their prices, which have been in the news a lot across the country, what do you think one of their primary input costs? Like, it costs a lot to keep those fridges and freezers running. Right. So if we can lower that for them, that's a primary input cost. So I do think that we can resolve that. Why? That's why we're focused on electricity. In electricity, what we're focused on is, to be perfectly honest, we're just trying to update the system. It was developed 25 years ago when all we did was shovel coal into a generator and create electricity. Really good power, really reliable, and really low cost because we have tons and tons of coal. Not so good for the environment.
Right.
Okay, we're making that shift.
We've transitioned almost completely now.
Almost completely, and by the middle of this year, we'll be completely off coal. And we can have that argument about all of those kind of things, but let's just leave that aside. We're here now. Where do we go from here? So we experienced on January the 13th the emergency alert.
Unprecedented, right?
Unprecedented to try to get people to be aware of the electricity system when it's really, really cold, and it's dark, and it's not windy, and when almost 30% of our generation comes from solar or wind that, because of their unique characteristics, weren't generating at that time. I don't want to blame them. We all knew it going in. The sun doesn't shine at night, and when it's not windy, it's not windy.
They're an important source of energy, and they serve their role, but they're over here.
Exactly. It's not the be all and end all. So what else are we doing? How do we strengthen, broaden, and enter into the conversation the word reliability? Because we need that. Because it is going to get cold and dark in winter, and more frequently, it's really hot in the summers too.
For sure.
And the number of air conditioners in every building and residence is going up, like straight up. So those kind of power draws, which we've typically had in the winter, are also now coming in the summer. With some serious consequences. Seniors especially are very vulnerable to very, very hot temperatures.
Right.
So we can figure that out. And there's a lot of talk about an energy-only market, which is basically you only pay for the energy that you use, or a capacity market where you pay to have this amount of energy on standby whether you use it or not.
Right.
And there's a fine balance between that, because you get too much capacity, you're paying for a lot of energy that you don't use, but you gotta pay for it. That's not always the best deal for Alberta. So we're trying to find the balance of that.
Because we're an energy-only market at this time.
Energy-only market, the only one in Canada. So we want to find that. But we also want to find the right balance and mix for our needs for reliability and affordability to get that as low as possible. But you can't go to zero, because then you bankrupt those reliability factors. So there's finding that balance on pricing. And then there's the secondary challenge, which is if you build a really good system, and I believe that we have and we will, we're going to have surplus energy. So what do we do with that? Now we've got to find ways of finding marketplace for that. So I can't share too much more about that, but in the next couple of weeks it's going to be very exciting, the vision that we've built for Alberta. Possibly for the first time considering technology and renewables and reducing our emissions and facing an affordability crisis. Back in the 90s, in the 80s even, we didn't really talk about affordability unless you were talking about interest rates, right? You're taught stuff was cheaper. So these are some new realities that, because of that, we have to look at things in a new light. And I think it's going to be exciting.
Okay. Now, I mean, I know another sort of area where there's a lot of criticism is insurance, particularly the fact that Alberta doesn't have caps and has more of our private sector model, as opposed to BC or Saskatchewan, where there's government insurance. Can you talk a little bit about some of the thoughts around your government's approach to what do we do with this insurance market? How do we deliver savings there?
Exactly, and that one's tough. There's fewer levers, right? Again, private markets can thrive if you have big populations, which is why the U.S. has a lot of these markets, and they can do very, very well. Just think of your cell phone plan compared to a U.S. cell phone plan. But that's strictly a function of population.
Yeah, makes me cry. Let's not talk about that.
I know. Me too. So if we can, and with Alberta being the last one, it's hard for us to grow that population. And 4.5 million, even 5 million, is not that attractive compared to California or New York, where they're at 35 million.
Right.
Let alone the whole nation of the U.S. at 335 million or 340 million. So that just means you only got so many levers to pull. And I mean, the government systems in BC, we know this for a fact, their insurance loses as a portfolio, they're losing money from somewhere else.
So it's really a tax subsidized premium. You're paying, it's same person paying, it's just paid in a different place.
It's just paid in a different place. So
I'm with you.
So those are hard, complex topics, not easy to explain, not easy to solve. And then again, we're faced with the fact that technology is wonderful but expensive. So car accidents now, which is probably the most frequent kind of insurance claim, In winters, I just had one, hit a deer on the west side. Vehicles are expensive to fix. Those parts are globally sourced, a lot more composites, a lot more computer chips. Good grief, I think I had 5 cameras that had to get replaced, and I don't know, that kind of stuff costs a lot more money than the old steel. And you have 6 bolts and you're good. Right?
Yeah. Fix it in your driveway, you're laughing.
Right. So same with housing, right? Like the technology in your roof shingles, the siding on your house, your windows, a lot more expensive than they used to be. So, and labor's more expensive. So what do we want? Do we want to roll back everybody's wages?
No.
No. Like that's almost a no-go. Like it's not really practical or realistic. And inflation is something we're not just fighting that here in Alberta or just Canada. It's global. Everything costs more. So when you replace it, your insurance has to either pay in for longer or you pay higher rates. Either way, you're paying.
Right.
And those are hard. Those are hard challenges. We are working on maximizing the group purchasing power. We're looking at a number of different things where we can pull out some of those added costs to that. We're considering a lot and working with the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Insurance Bureau of Alberta to try to find solutions with pretty key partners.
Right.
But those are businesses too, and they serve a function. I can tell you, if you're in a car accident or you have an insurance claim on your house, you don't want to not have insurance. Or in the death of a loved one, you don't necessarily not want to have insurance because there's costs, right?
Right.
So it's like I like to term it a necessary evil in the day and age that we live.
Yeah, you really have to have insurance in place and protect yourself and your family, right?
Yeah. So doing a lot of work with Minister of Finance Nate Horner to try to find some of those solutions, but there's a couple of things that we can't magically make our population bigger, and we can't make things cost less. So you're a bit between a rock and a hard place.
And I mean, that was essentially, looking at your mandate letter from the Premier is essentially make life more affordable, put more of Albertans' money back in their pockets. I mean, I can't think of a more broader sort of assignment. Is there anything else that your ministry's focused on, or other sort of big rocks that you see as driving more money back to Albertans?
Yeah, there's a number of things. We're talking about broadband. Right now it is with the Minister of Technology and Innovation, Nate Neudorf, doing a great job there. But the actual implementation and building of it actually aligns a lot with our utility providers.
And treating internet as a core utility, which it's become, right?
Which it's become. So we're going, okay, can we do this cross-utility collaboration? Instead of digging 3 trenches to the same house or the same business, can we build one? Like just dig 1 trench and put it all in there and make it work? Talks about how do we, water is top of mind for a lot of people, especially in Alberta. Water is a utility. Can we do that better? How much water is lost through old pipes or leaking pipes or inefficient systems? Because that water loss, when you're in a drought for the 3rd year, going on the 4th year in a row, that starts to really matter.
Truly, every drop is
drop is precious, right? So, I do joke with my staff. Sometimes we feel like we're the ministry of everything. We're and affordable housing. We're working with Minister Jason Nixon on affordable housing, which is for those people who don't have the finances to be able to do that on their own. So supportive living, but there's also housing affordability, which is now back with Minister McIver, Minister of Municipal Affairs, because of building codes, to how do we lower that cost of the house, which it's significant. I mean, we love really nice broad sidewalks and boulevards. Someone's got to mow that grass, and someone's got to shovel that and maintain it, and someone's going to pay for it. So that's expensive. Recycling programs, which are great, have a cost, and safety codes for how far your house has got to be from another house, and this and that, and the materials you use adds cost. It's not that we don't want those things. We need to consider what is really essential and vital, and which are nice to haves, and allow people some of that choice and some of those kind of things, and empower, again, back to the beginning, our great construction industry to provide a really high quality product as affordably as possible. So it's not layered on costs by government or different levels of government.
Now, I mean, government's often accused of sort of siloed thinking, and you've talked about working collaboratively just in the last couple of minutes across multiple ministries. You know, is your government, is it doing business differently? Is there more cross-ministry collaboration, or is it still government? It's still tough to bridge some of those gaps?
It is still government. It's still tough to bridge those gaps, but we have a lens and focus on it that I don't know how often it's been done before. I'm sure it has, and I don't want to discredit anybody else, but it is certainly focused. Like these dual mandates, myself with Minister Horn, myself with Minister Nix, myself with Minister Glubish, those kind of things where it's in the letter, it's part of my job, so even if it's forced meeting, it's still a meeting that happens. And
right.
I know the Minister of Health, Minister Adriana Lagrange, health is this huge file.
It's literally half the provincial budget. It's the biggest single chunk. It is the biggest
single thing. So how does one person manage all of that? Well, she's going to work very closely with the Minister Dan Williams in mental health and addiction. She also works with Minister Nixon in community social services. She works with Minister Cyril Turton in children's services because there's a connection there.
Right.
She also works with Minister Rick Wilson in our Indigenous relations file because health is a pretty broad need. And when they work on it together or break some things apart, even in the proposed restructuring of Alberta Health Services, it's with that lens to try to get a little bit more attention on some very needed areas, because they're linked anyways. A lot of the challenges that we face at our Chinook Regional Hospital and many other hospitals is there's individuals there who can actually get better long-term care somewhere else, but we've got to get them out and move them. Well, that's moving them into community and social services, that
right.
continuing care piece. So focusing on that to make it work better at a lower cost is pretty essential. That's a couple people working on the same problem. Mental health and addictions has become two ginormous issues within North America, around the world, really. Again, something that was exacerbated by the pandemic, global pandemic.
Definitely didn't help.
Definitely didn't help. So, I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, and you were growing up as a kid, I'm sure you're a bit younger than me, I think. You better look at.
Thanks for that.
We didn't talk about mental health, right? Rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine. Was kind of
there was no conversation really in schools or even at home for the most part.
We didn't understand concussions either.
Right.
Like, come on, kid.
Get up,
get going again. What are you sitting in the dark for? So we've developed a lot. These are critical issues, and we're learning about them. And the other unique thing about humankind is we're different too.
Right.
We could suffer the same kind of challenges, but we're likely to process it differently. So the one-size-fits-all solution, which governments around the world have been applying for millennia, doesn't work as well now.
You've got to find a solution for that person and their specific ailment or challenge.
Particularly if you're talking about mental health
right.
addictions, because that unique individual is that unique individual. And their road or path to recovery, well, maybe in the same building will be different, right? Maybe for them it was a traumatic relationship, somebody died or something happened with family, or maybe it was an addiction with gambling that got them in a really bad
right.
spot. Like, those are different pathways to recovery because they're different pathways to the affliction. So, yeah, I think it's becoming a requirement for governments to see what we can do to work together, because it's going to take a multiple angled approach to address it. We're not one-dimensional beings.
Right.
We never were, and those kind of solutions aren't working anymore.
No, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I mean, I want to come back to sort of the electricity piece, because I know that's top of mind for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
You've been a pretty big proponent of SMR, or small modular reactor, right from the very beginnings. I mean, I think I first met you. There's a lot of critics that talk about that being a 10, 15, 20-year project, and they're quite critical of that. Can you talk about, again, not getting into sort of the policy stuff, but in general, what do you see the role of nuclear in Alberta's grid, and where does that fit?
Sure, yeah. I love it. I love it for a number of reasons. One is it's so powerful, and we have a fantastic neighbor in Saskatchewan that has the raw materials to power it.
Right.
And two, it's fascinating technology. Now, since becoming minister, I said, listen, I love SMRs, I just don't want to buy the first one. Because they're going to learn a lot of tricks, and the first one's going to cost a lot. So Ontario is actually working on a bunch of them right now.
Okay.
In some of their nuclear plants, and they've been on nuclear since like the 1950s. They've had nuclear power, which is amazing. And in terms of nuclear technology for generating electricity, Canada is one of the top 5 nations in the world.
They're very well respected for our CANDU reactors. We have
incredible
uranium supplies naturally occurring.
Exactly.
Right.
So the one small downside of nuclear is what you do with the waste. So one is you don't have that waste for 25 years. Like you fuel it up and it goes for 25 years, and then you have a very, very small amount of it, which can be very securely stored and for a lot of years. So Ontario has that right now. They have an amazing storage facility, highly secure, very safe. The only real threat is literally a bomb on that. And that's more about spillage. It's not going to blow up or anything. It's just going to...
Contamination and other issues.
Exactly. So now they're exploring very, very, very long-term subterranean storage, concrete line, steel enclosed, all of those multi-layers of... And it's an interesting process to watch. So we're taking a lot of learnings from Ontario as Canada's leader in this sector. We have an MOU with Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, and I think maybe Manitoba. Trying to remember for furthering this. And you're right. Initially, the technology was 10 or 15 years out. Ontario is working on that now. Capital Power in Alberta and Cenovus in Alberta are looking on making that applicable in Alberta privately by the mid-2030s, so 10 years. And there are some, every nuclear submarine has one, basically.
Right.
Right? So the technology's there. Now it's how do we mass produce it to bring that individual cost down? Right. And it's green, clean electricity, and really rampable. So it'll factor in. Now an SMR, a small modular reactor, is about 150 to 300 megawatts. And where that's important is our grid in Alberta, our peak load is somewhere right around 12,000 megawatts. And our big power generators, our really, really big ones, they're normally generating about 900 megawatts. So 300 is a piece. And it would be very locationally driven, smaller, remote communities to put one in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the city of Lethbridge on peak is about 125 to 130 million, or sorry, 130 megawatts.
Yeah.
So, if you had one that was 150, you're sized almost to power, a mid-sized city, right?
Exactly. So they would be, they're really nice to be able to plug and play. But again, you're right, still 10, 15 years out from today for Alberta, even though the technology is getting much closer than that. So yeah, these are considerations. We're just at the brink of it going, listen, people want reliable, people want affordable, and people want low or zero emitting. That's reality. So where are we going to put those dollars? Carbon capture, utilization, storage, CCUS, is also but it doesn't produce anything, right? Like it just takes out carbon from the exhaust, which is very good, but it's a lot of dollars, and there's no return on that investment. We're just taking something out of the air and pumping it into an underground storage.
Right. Nuclear is at least producing actively things that we can use.
So there's different approaches, and we're weighing all of those approaches as to what we can do best. But I am excited about technology and the rapid increase in technology. I sometimes neglect. We seem to forget geothermal. Fantastic, zero emitting, reliable, baseload kind of power. They can do that for electricity, definitely heating. So we're starting to look at those unique characteristics. Biomass, hydrogen as a fuel source to burn is much cleaner than natural gas. So how do we do that? How do you take the feedstock of natural gas, pull out your hydrogen, and capture carbon? So it's also a product that you can use, like a carbon fiber for building things, not for burning. just that distinction.
Yeah.
But
there's a huge carbon fiber market that Alberta is well positioned to serve.
Exactly.
Right?
So we're looking at all these things, and this is the other challenge that we're facing now that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago, is the rapidity of technological advancement is multiple every year. Like, it is just growing so rapidly that we have to start making these legislative regulatory changes to just keep up.
Right.
To allow for those new technologies, so that when we get the low cost, cheaper burning, blah, 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 we can actually accommodate it within our grid.
That it doesn't require all kinds of additional assessment.
Yeah, we can be ready for that and regulate that in a way and plan for that, right? Because those things come in, they displace something else. And if I would make one criticism of getting off coal, is it happened at a time where coal is still really cheap. And how much money could we have saved if we didn't have to do that immediately, if we had taken the lead on? Because Albertans may not even know, we're still paying for coal. $93 million a year for another 6 years, 14 years in total from when we started.
Paying those generators for assets that were transitioned.
Yeah. But we're not getting anything back from that now. Like, we're paying for abandoned assets.
Right.
Not ideal. I understand it. We've done it. We're not going back and changing that, but we don't want to do that with our natural gas producers. We want to say, what's a good transition? How do we maximize that asset value and the return for investment, so we don't pay a lot now, we pay a little over a long period of time.
Right.
Right? And we maximize the value to Albertans who pay for that power. And then when it's at end of life, if we've planned well, the new generation will come on right at the same time. But that takes a lot of planning.
There's a lot to line up there.
There's a lot to line up, and that's where probably my most exciting announcement will be something about that kind of planning.
All right, so that's the preview, is it?
Yeah.
The teaser. Okay. Well, we're almost out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
The hour's flown by.
Yeah, it has.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, sort of your priorities for Lethbridge. What do you see as some of the key issues? You know, you're clearly our local representative, one of two.
Mm-hmm.
So what's on your docket from advocating for Lethbridge at Edmonton?
Yeah, so my primary advocacy for Lethbridge is less about certain projects and more about the thinking, as we alluded to earlier, of what Lethbridge is. And embedding that in the institutional knowledge of the capital city, that Lethbridge is a hub, it's not a spoke. So we need to think about Lethbridge in that way and invest in Lethbridge that way. Our hospital here is terrific. It has grown somewhat, but it's a tier 4, which means the services it has are at a certain level. And I'm advocating for it to become a tier 3, which means that you have cardiac, thoracic, and neurosurgeries. If you have that surgical capacity, if you invested in the infrastructure to be able to have that, it's a lot easier to attract those kind of medical specialists to Lethbridge.
Yeah, it builds on itself, right?
It builds on itself. And that will help in quite a number of ways. One is we have a very pressing shortage of anesthesiologists. Partly because while we do that, there's not quite enough here to draw a central mass of them. They want to maximize their time. They spend a lot of money on schooling to get that specialized education, so they want to know that they can put the hours in to pay off that school and make the income that they're hoping to make for that, which is fantastic. So if we have that capacity, creates those opportunities, creates that broader stability, so hopefully that would allow for the anesthesiologists. We get those anesthesiologists, we can do more surgeries, which means obstetricians, which we also have a shortage of.
Right.
They need to know that they have that surgical backup if a pregnancy or a delivery goes wrong. Surgical backup is pretty important. So that will help stabilize, in my opinion, obstetricians and help attract them here, that they have the infrastructure services that they want to be able to provide to their patients.
Right.
It helped. We're starting the path of getting a cath lab, which is wonderful, but without the surgical backup, our cardiologists can only do so much, right? Because, hey, you're dealing with the heart and arteries. If something goes wrong there,
you've got to have an option B.
You need surgery now, not 2.5 hours when you get to Calgary.
Right.
You'll be dead. you have minutes. So having that surgical capacity in cardiology in the cath lab means that we can do a lot more of those services here. And if we had start building out those specialties out and having that surgical backup out, all those patients that we're transferring to Calgary, a lot of those can stay here now and get that service here, which is better for the patient.
Yeah, quality of life certainly
Quality
improves.
of life, better for their families. They're not driving to Calgary trying to find accommodations. All of those, that's all here now. And so how much are we going to save on the transport and the specialists and all of those kind of things? So if we can get to that nuclear mass of health services here in Lethbridge, it really starts to answer a lot of the other challenges that we face. So back to your question, that's what drives me about Lethbridge. Lethbridge has been kind of that sleepy, slow growth, 2-3% a year. Let's supercharge that. Let's be the hub. We are on the cusp of an incredible breakthrough with our agricultural food processing. Got a lot of interest here. We as a province, we ask the federal government, you got to make some strategic investments in Lethbridge so that we can grow that, get to that size. A lot of restaurants, a lot of the Performing Arts Center, a lot of those wraparound businesses, they don't consider a city until you hit the 120,000, 150,000 threshold, because that's when you start getting that population
mass. Critical mass. So we got this potential, right, that's just bubbling.
And we're at about 105. We're at 105. So we're so close we can see it, we can taste it, but we're not quite there. We have to start talking about and making those investments. We've got a long-term investment for Twinning Highway 3, both directions, really, really critical as an arterial pathway for trades and goods. Now we need to think about it in terms of our water, wastewater treatment, our hospital and services, some of those specialized wraparound services, because we get there, then some of those really big drawing restaurants, they want to come to Lethbridge. Let's put them with the Performing Arts Center, where one helps the other and vice versa, because they need to work together. If you don't have that population and you don't have that sort of booming economy, which we have not yet had, it's kind of hard to do that. You Google Lethbridge and you see the addictions challenges that we face, or you're hearing about the problems of Lethbridge instead of the opportunities in Lethbridge. And I want to change that perception. That's why, as much as possible, I talk about all the benefits. I talk about the airport and the growth there, the food industry. We got an amazing university. We have an amazing college. We have problems. Everyone's got problems, but we're getting better. I absolutely believe that we're getting better, and if we make some strategic investments, we can, like I said, supercharge that. And that goes back to, again, where we started, being proud of where you're from.
Right.
I'm proud of where we're from. I know you're proud of where we're from, and hopefully Jess is proud of where he's from, and now he's made this his home. So let's take that pride and let's rub off the rough spots and make it even better. And I think that's what really gets me up in the morning.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I know you have another event to go to after this, so I appreciate you making time for us today.
You bet. A real honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you so much. That's it for today, folks. Please join me next month, March the 21st.